understanding the progression of relapses and maybe even leaning into the good reasons of understanding the things that can be indicators, or maybe some of those actions or tendencies that we can fall into that may be red flags that are on the way to the catastrophe, or what we say in recovery language, a relapse. Today, we're going to unpack that progression. Well, welcome to Hope and Recovery, a Fellowship Celebrate Recovery podcast. This is a podcast that focuses on life change stories and recovery topics that help us to maybe walk in healing and freedom in our mental, our emotional, our spiritual, and even our relational relationships, our recovery, this life that we call recovery. All based on the Beatitudes, where Jesus helps us to face our hurts, habits, and hang-ups through the 8 principles based on those Beatitudes, so that we can walk in freedom and lasting life as Jesus has the power to give us in our life when we turn our life and our will over to His care and control. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ. I struggle with drugs and alcohol and perfectionism. My name is Rodney. I'm the ministry leader and one of the pastors here at Fellowship with Celebrate Recovery here in Rogers. Hey, welcome back. Hopefully you're enjoying this. And if you like what you're hearing, as always, please share and give us a rating so that we can get more impact and expand that footprint. But I got a brother with me. You know him well, Andy from Fayetteville, ministry leader, Celebrate Recovery. Andy, welcome. Glad to have you with us, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. Hey, y'all. I am a grateful believer in Jesus. Struggle with anxiety, depression, sexual addiction, and grief. My name is Andy.
Hey, Andy.
Hey.
So you and I mean, we've talked about relapse in different contexts before, and even on previous podcasts and understanding that. But we want to take a little bit different angle today, kind of understanding in the book, The Life-Sealing Choices. By the way, if you've never read Life-Sealing Choices, great book. I think Pastor John Baker said that he wrote this book for people that may not walk through the doors of Celebrate Recovery, but I think it's good for people that are in recovery because it helps give us simple language on what we do here. But one of the ways that it's phrased in that lesson, it's in that maintaining momentum chapter in choice 7, is that predictable pattern of relapse.
Yeah.
And just understanding. And even the language predictable, that when these things pop up, it's a predictable pattern that is an indicator. It's not a matter of if, but when, if we stay on that course of action. So thoughts that come to mind when we're talking about that predictable pattern of relapse.
Well, I think one of the things that comes to mind for me, and I've probably told this on the podcast before, but I remember processing with my sponsor, Tim, once about a relapse that I had early in my recovery. And it was kind of in that season where I was still trying to get traction. I hadn't had a long stretch of sobriety yet. And I had relapsed, and I was kind of confessing it, like we were talking about the weather. And he's like, well, hey man, what happened? And I'm like, I don't know. I just wanted to act out. And he's like, come on, man. Like, there's something there. And I know there's been times when I've been talking to guys, and it's this, we're surprised when a relapse happens. And of course, it's something that we don't want to happen in there, but it feels like it jumps up and bites us. But even in that language, predictable pattern of relapse, I've started getting into, I grew up in a kind of a redneck family a little bit, that, we grew up hunting and shooting all the time. And, recently I've started shooting pistols a little bit more. And I'm realizing that it's so much different than, shooting 22s with my dad and stuff and plinking around. And noticing that I'm not as good of a shot as I thought I was. And realizing that there's groupings that I'm having that are a little bit off of the center. And I was talking to a friend of mine that's a law enforcement officer, and he was showing me a diagram of, it was a target, and he said it was divided into little quadrants, and it said, if your shots are lining in this part of the pie chart, then this is actually what's causing that. And if it's over here, then you're jerking the gun down a little bit whenever you're shooting, or if you're shooting over on this side of it, you're pulling it this way on there, and descriptions on how to readjust. And it was kind of a cool thing to see of like, oh, I'm looking at it going, what the heck's wrong with this? Like maybe, but realizing, oh, there's a reason behind this. And I know we were talking about that a while ago, and just it's the same way within my recovery. If I am seeing the fruit of something happening, there's been some stuff going on under the surface, and probably it's been going on longer than I realize.
Yeah. So I love that imagery when you first brought it up, man. That's a very good simplistic view. But so the target, and it might be good to kind of get clear and make sure we have the right definition of what is the target.
Yeah.
Right. What is the target for us in life as believers? Because I think one of the things that we can fall into temptation in believing is that perfection is the target. And we're not talking about perfection, right? So Andy, give me some real practical, simple language on what would be the target for me. I'm in recovery. I want to stay away from the addictions, but what is the target for me? What does that look practically? Kind of bantering with you in that.
Yeah. One of the things that I think of is less of behavior and more of what are those things that lead to the behavior. So like for me, one of the quote unquote targets for my recovery is making sure that I don't hide. And so that just simple aspect of when I'm struggling, am I talking to somebody about it? And am I doing that on the front side of a relapse as compared to the back side of a relapse? And so I think that's one aspect of it is, am I using the tools that I have learned along the way?
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things that it talks about in that choice 7, which is just a different language for principle 7, where we're reserving a daily time with God for self-examination, Bible reading, and prayer. So in order to know God's will for our life, one of the things it talks about is that we revert back to our own willpower.
Yeah.
Is I'm trying to manage things, and so probably good to get organized in our own personal, those that are listening right now, trying to make sense of this, is what does that look like in your life when you're reverting back to your own willpower?
Yeah.
Because that might be the greatest indicator that I'm missing the target, as you were talking, I keep hitting to the left or up and to the right. And that, what are the things that maybe indicators or action tendencies, right?
Yeah. And, for me, like I want to stay in a healthy place where I'm acknowledging when I'm hurting, that I'm not slipping back into those old thought patterns in there, and that I'm staying connected to the people that are around me. And so I think the primary target for all of it is ever deepening relationship with Christ. I think that's the center of the target is, am I staying connected to Jesus?
Yeah.
And the way that I stay connected to Jesus is a lot of what Principle 7 talks about, reserving a daily time for, Bible reading, prayer, and using the tools that are around me in that, and bringing people into that.
Yeah. So staying connected to the vine, so to speak, knowing that every ounce of fruit will give us, that comes from us, first comes to us.
Yep.
And so that's why that reserving a daily time is so important. So one of those things that we talk about, Andy, that can kind of be indicators, or that predictable pattern that we're talking about, is complacency.
Yeah.
It's almost like when I think of complacency, it's almost like I'm living on yesterday's bread, right?
Yep.
It's like I had a good day yesterday. Instead of leaning in, what were the things and aspects of my day that made that a good day? I kind of get complacent. And I think, we'll see how this kind of moves through the cycle. But I think another word you can put with complacency is comfort.
Yeah.
We get comfortable, things are going all right, and I don't know why it is this way, but if I'm not feeling any pain, then I just get comfortable and complacent. What's that look like practically?
Yeah. Well, it's those, it's for me, it's almost like a lack of intentionality within my recovery. I start checking out and I start living on autopilot a little bit.
Yeah.
And I can slip into an arrogant confidence of, I've been doing this for a while. I'm fine. And that phrase right there, I'm fine, or I got this, those are those famous last words right there.
Yeah. Are you really fine? It doesn't mean we don't have good days. I mean, we have good days. The point of it is not acting like every day that things are in chaos.
Yeah.
But it's that, I love that word, intentionality. What am I doing today that's intentional in this, just thinking about the scripture of, to be transformed by the renewing.
Yeah.
We've been renewed and now he is renewing. And so it's a process. We're working out our salvation, right? In Christian terms, that we're working out our salvation as we walk. And so am I being intentional with what I'm feeding my mind, how I'm using my mind, what I'm feeding my heart, how I'm expressing my heart, and physically, what am I doing with that? What are my actions today with intentionality? I like that word.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the phrases that I can't remember exactly where I heard it, but like, am I happening to life or is life happening to me? And I think that's been good for me to think through, because I think when I am most prone to fall into complacency is when, so there's the comfort aspect. I just get super comfortable, or I'm really fatigued. If I feel really tired and I feel like I've been just grinding it out, there's only so much of that I can take. And so if I'm not doing a good job taking care of myself, then I am priming myself to fall into complacency.
Yeah.
And I stop journaling, I stop reading. Maybe I'm just like, I don't think I need to go to a meeting this week. I'm all right. It hasn't been a hard week this week. It'll be okay. I start making really lame excuses.
Yeah, which is why, taking care of ourselves physically is so important to our recovery health, because if we get fatigued, and I've shared this with many sponsees, that kind of those common traits to someone in a relapse that we'll see is, they're either very, very tired, so fatigue that you just mentioned, busy, right? They're just too busy to do what they were doing, or lack of devotional, which is connected with that principle 7, reserving a daily time with God. So it makes sense, though, as we move into that second pattern, predictable pattern. If we're not connected with the vine, we're not connected with the Father, we're not staying in community, we're not being intentional, it makes sense that next predictable pattern in that process would be confusion.
Yeah.
That's where the enemy kind of pulls us away from that community, and he creates confusion and chaos in our brain where we can't tell which way is up anymore.
Yeah. Well, and for me, I think one of the biggest indicators that I might be slipping into confusion is I start forgetting just how bad it was when I got into recovery.
Yeah.
And so if I find myself starting to fantasize about what it was like to act out, or thinking about
maybe it wasn't that bad.
Yeah. Or, that I sure did have a lot of fun. Those types of thoughts. It's like, whoa, Andy, what's true here, man?
Yeah.
What is true? And I start bending the lines of what really is reality.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that on a previous podcast, just talking about addiction, a lot of that can be triggered by pain.
Yeah.
And the enemy, because we're not connected to the vine, we're not connected with the Father and the community. When we feel pain, we start buying into that notion that, well, maybe I need to go back to my old ways of finding comfort.
Yeah.
The enemy's saying, hey, you're hurting. I can give you a way to feel better. Or we start feeling lonely and he wants to give us that place of a false identity, but it feels real. It's like, I feel like somebody. Or we find ourselves in, just this whole cycle of, I'm feeling pretty weak. I've, had a bad day at work today. I want something to make me feel strong again, to feel empowered.
Yeah.
And it's not coming from God, so it can be a recipe for a disaster. So I want to take, go ahead. You
Yeah. Well, I think one other side of confusion is if I haven't learned how to celebrate in a healthy way. Man, I've been doing really well. I deserve. I could have a drink with dinner. That'll be all right. Like it wasn't that bad. And I'm in such a better place now.
Yeah.
And those funky ways of thinking start to creep back into.
Yeah, that's a good reminder. Well, talking with Andy, talking about just how these predictable patterns of relapse can creep in and what are some things that we can do. We'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll continue that conversation. Stick with us. Hey, folks, if you're looking for a safe place to focus on those hurts, hangups, and habits, or maybe even some of those predictable patterns of relapse that are discussed today on today's podcast, know that you don't have to face that alone. You're not designed to do that. Come join us on a Friday night at Fayetteville or in Rogers at Fellowship. We meet at 6 for Connection Cafe meal, and our main meeting starts at 7. Come see us. We'd love to have you. fellowshipcr.org for more information. Welcome back. Andy, right before break, we were talking about that confusion where we start to justify. It's like, well, maybe I deserve this. And, that when you were talking, it reminded me of one of the probably biggest indicators. Dallas Willards was sharing a story one time, a true story of a female autopilot. She's up doing these drills. She's flying up, she's flying down, and she's doing all these drills, these G turns and such. And she's up in the sky, and there's a point in her drills that she gets a little bit disoriented. And what she thought was up was actually down. She lost sight. Is that the water? Is that the mountains? Is that the sky? And so in her disoriented, confused, using this language that we're talking about, because she got disoriented, she thought she was pulling up. And so she pulled up hard to go up, not knowing that she was actually upside down. And instead of going up, she went right into the ground and died. Tragic story, but a good reminder that sometimes in flight, we can get disoriented, and the enemy will try to confuse us, which is why we want to stay connected to Jesus in the body of Christ so that we hear his truth and healthy principles of hitting the target, so to speak, you were talking about, so that in the day in and day out process, we don't get disoriented and pull up hard thinking that we're upright when in fact we're actually upside down. So that pilot, and we can fall into this, we lose our sense of which way is up. We lose that moral compass. We lose the right way to go through life, and which you can always, and we'll talk more about that, can end in those tragedies, right?
Yeah. Well, and even just thinking like, when I find myself in a disoriented place, knowing my heart and just how messed up I am, there's a part of me that always creeps up, especially when I'm in an unhealthy spot, that says, I feel a little disoriented, but I got this.
Yeah.
I'm all right. I know where I'm at. Let me pull up here. And that's why it's so important for me when I feel disoriented, when I notice that. And that's one of the things about this progression. We can stop it at any point.
Right.
There's this relapse is always possible, but it's never inevitable.
Right.
And if I find myself disoriented, the thing that I do is I don't make a move. I ask somebody for help. Man, hey, let me radio the tower. Hey, this is a little embarrassing. I know I've been up here for a while and doing this, but what direction am I facing right now?
Yeah, that's good. And I love that, just because I'm maybe in complacency or comfort or confusion doesn't mean that it's inevitable, but it's a good warning. It's that dashboard, right? So I love that question, just even talking to our sponsors and mentors to say, hey, this is what I'm thinking. What do you think? Is this correct? Because I think in that confusion, it does take us into that next pattern. We start to, because we're upside down, we're pulling up when we think we're upright, we're actually upside down. We start to make compromises. And man, it's so misleading, isn't it? Because it feels like, what's the big deal? What does compromise look like? What are some of those things that come to mind that can be compromises that don't feel like it in the moment?
Yeah, I think for me, it's those little self-justifying things. Well, this isn't technically pornography. And I think, and so I start trying to get up to the line. I start going, what's the line and how can I toe it as close as possible? Where's the edge of the neighborhood and how can I stand on the edge of the neighborhood but still be close to it?
Yeah, and that's dangerous, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
And it's probably good to state this, and we'll talk more about this in the addictions podcast, but sometimes it's not looking at something that's pornography-ish. Sometimes it may be when I do these other things, it leads to pornography, right?
Yeah.
So when I watch this kind of a movie, it leads to this. And it may not even be something that's can be labeled as any kind of form of pornography, but I know that if I watch these kind of things, and you can fill in the blanks, whatever that is for you, or when I'm hanging out with these kind of people, or when I go to these kind of places, I'm susceptible and vulnerable. So I start making compromises as, just one look, just one sip, or whatever that is, that to the outside voice would be like, what's the big deal?
Yeah.
You're good. You got this, man. And we slip back into our own power, don't we?
Yeah. It's, I'm going to go to the bar and just play pool. They've got great BLTs. That's, it's those little things where, that's why I said it's those little self-justification things of like, well, yeah, I'm fine.
Yeah.
I can do this. Whereas, and again, that's how the confusion plays into it and the complacency plays into it. When I'm not staying connected, when I'm not doing the things that I need to do, then it's easier for me to forget the truth.
Yeah.
And it's easier for me to kind of tell myself half truths or not look at the whole truth or just straight up lie to myself.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me, I can remember a guy just sharing about his struggles with gambling and this particular place that he would go to, they made amazing cupcakes and they really did. It was really good, but it was kind of the lure to get them in the door. And he was in his mind compromising and justifying, well, I'm just going there for the cupcakes. But the problem was he had to walk through a casino to get to it. And so every time he did that, he was putting himself in that playground. And so it's fascinating and cruel how the enemy kind of tricks us into those compromises.
Well, when you just said playground there, that reminds me, one of the things we tell folks when they first come in is thinking about changing your changing your scenery and changing the people you hang around with. So those playgrounds, playmates, and playthings that we were around and were an active part of our life when we were in our dysfunction. And one of those things that could be compromising and could be a good question is, am I going back to some of those old playgrounds?
Yeah.
Am I reconnecting with some of those old playmates?
Yeah.
Am I picking up some of those old playthings?
Yeah.
Because it could be something as simple as, man, I'm in such a healthier place now. I wonder how my old girlfriend's doing.
Yeah.
Let me just message her real quick and just see, what's up? How have you been? Super innocent. I'm not doing anything wrong, but
Dangerous.
we got to check our hearts. And
Yeah. I love that. People, places, and things. I love that language of play.
Yeah.
Playgrounds and the toys that we're looking for. But it makes sense. I mean, when you think about the order, because you got comfortable and complacent, you got a little bit confused because you're not connected to the right source anymore. And as a result, you're making compromises, and inevitably, I've not seen anybody that doesn't address that not end up in that place of catastrophe. And that's the highest predictable pattern of relapse. When we're in catastrophe, that's pretty predictable. We're in the relapse.
Yeah.
But what a great reminder that the relapse isn't happening in the moment. It happened way back into complacency and comfort, right?
Yeah.
And now we're in this place of catastrophe. And what comes up for your heart when you're thinking about catastrophe and this predictable pattern of relapse?
Man, oftentimes catastrophe is where reality rushes back in. It's the, dang it.
Yep.
I'm back in this spot. And, I think about the thing that's coming to mind, and hopefully I articulate this well. If I burn down a house, and I don't want to do that anymore, and I forget what it was like to be in that fire. If I get really, if I start losing a healthy fear of fire, and then if I start buying, and if I start buying matches and gasoline after that, where am I heading?
Yeah.
And before I know it, the house is back on fire again.
Yeah.
And I'm going, dang it, I've been here before.
Yeah. Yeah. Understanding. Okay. Because sometimes we do, and that's so good that you're saying that, because sometimes we just focus on fire, put the fire out. Don't let fire happen again. Don't just make sure fire. But we don't talk about, well, how did the fire start?
Yeah.
What did you do, or what were the actions or tendencies that you might have invited in as steps in your walk that have led to the fire?
Yeah.
To understand that, because not to shame it, but to understand it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. If we don't, then we're going to stay stuck in this place of catastrophe. So I think it's important, as we're running out of time here, what do I do if I'm in a place of catastrophe, right?
Yeah.
I've burned down the house. What do I do with that, Andy? Someone's in the middle of a catastrophe, a relapse. What do you do with that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've heard you say it before, but my recovery plan doesn't change with a relapse. I know the tools if I've been walking this recovery road any amount of time.
Right.
And it's not really about the fall. It's about whether or not we're going to get back up. And what are those steps? So the best place for me to go if I've relapsed is to a meeting.
Yeah.
The best person to talk to if I've relapsed is my sponsor.
Yeah, that's so good. Relapse is an indicator that we've disconnected.
Yeah.
We've disconnected with God, our higher power. We've disconnected with others. So very simplistic, just reconnect.
Yeah.
Pick up the phone, call that other person, hopefully your sponsor. If you don't have a sponsor and you're in the middle of a relapse, maybe that's part of the plan of evaluation. You know what? I thought I could do this on my own. I need to change that. I need to invite someone into that space. But who can I reach out to right now? Maybe you start with a text. It feels too scary to pick up the phone. At least text and say, I'm in a bad spot. I need your prayer. When's a good time to visit, kind of a thing, right?
Yeah. Well, and I remember there was a season where I was in a rough patch in my recovery. It was a high stress season. And I remember talking to my sponsor and feeling like, golly, I've been doing this a long time. And I feel like I'm failing because I feel like I'm struggling. And he looked at me, he goes, Andy, this is a ministry where we all admit that we're all messed up and we need help. That doesn't change with the amount of time we've been doing this.
Yeah.
And so
for sure.
If you're struggling, it's the best place to be.
Yeah. I love that. Well, predictable patterns of relapse, complacency, or you could say comfort. We find ourselves then as a result in a place of confusion. We start making compromises and catastrophe. And I think the greatest picture of this as we wrap up here, King David.
Yeah.
Right. He was supposed to be out in the fields working with his buddies and his guys, and he decided to stay home. I'm just going to hang out in bed. He didn't do the next right thing. And he kind of got complacent there, right? And it created a place of confusion. He walks out on the deck. He sees a woman, Bathsheba. He starts to get into a bad headspace. He makes compromises. He invites her in. And this is a married woman. It's like, I would never do this, but the compromise of inviting her in, and then catastrophe, right? Then it just continued, and then he's plotting a murder against her husband, and he's in a bad spot. Nasty cycle. Mm-hmm. Good to be aware of that, but it's not mandated.
Yeah. Well, and I think the thing that if you do find yourself in catastrophe right now, don't let shame keep you there.
Yeah.
The patience of Jesus, if you are his child, his patience for you is, you're not going to exhaust it.
Yeah. His grace.
His grace is for you.
Grace never runs out.
Yes.
Awesome. Andy, thanks, man. Great conversation. Hopefully this has been beneficial for you. I hope it has been. Whether you're in that place of complacency, or maybe you're in a place of confusion or making compromises and you need to own that, or even in a place of catastrophe, please just acknowledge it. Just admit it. That's the first step in just saying, I can't do this. This is a mess. I need help. Reconnect. Your place of catastrophe has just created disconnection, and it's time to reconnect with the tools and the resources, especially the source in Jesus Christ, to get you back on the road, to pick up where we left off and maintain and get that fruit back in your life. So, hey, thanks for being with us today. Please don't face this alone. Come see us on a Friday night. We're at Fellowship Fayetteville or Fellowship Rogers on Friday nights, 6 p.m. Connection Cafe meal. And then our main meeting starts at 7. Hey, thanks for being with us today. We hope it's blessed you. We hope you'll join us next time. Until then, God bless.